Hey everyone, I just interviewed Melmsie last week. Melmsie is the driving force behind DankMemer and the vice president of experience at CyberInfo. For some topics that we talked about, if you don't want to watch the whole video and maybe some of this just piques your interest, we talked about DankMemer, which is the biggest game on Discord right now. Discord is a chat application. Most of the time when you think about games, you think of someone sitting in front of a keyboard and mouse or a controller and experiencing graphics and music and audio. Discord is a very unique platform for developing games. So we talked about his experience with that, the outlook of the game and what he's thought about it. He was diagnosed with ADHD last year. So we talked about the impact to him and what he's learned. And we also talked a little bit about CyberInfo. There's one last thing I want to share before we get started here. And it was my introduction to Melmsie 6.5 years ago. He came to my Twitch channel and he said, just found you while looking for someone chill to listen to while working on my bot. And I must have asked, what bot are you working on? And he said, Discord meme bot, actually, 118,000 servers use it. So it was already very popular back then and has only grown since. Without further ado, here's the interview with Melmsie. Hope you enjoy. Thank you for being here. First of all, I think this is great. Do you want to give a little intro for yourself so that people know who I'm talking to right now, who Melmsie is?
Sure. Hi, I'm Melmsie. I go by Mel casually, and I develop a Discord bot named DankMemer. I've been doing so since 2017. Started as a hobby, and now it's a business that I do full time. And I do a few other small projects, but that's the majority of my time.
Okay, yeah. Do you mind giving a brief overview of what DankMemer is and maybe a little bit about its evolution? I know you said it started as a hobby, but I think it has evolved over that time from just memes into more of a game. So yeah, why don't you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so if you aren't familiar with Discord, it's a chat platform, very common these days, replaced like Skype and TeamSpeak for a lot of people. And they have an API where you can build bots. And back in 2017, when I wanted to learn programming, I built a bot that basically reposted memes from Reddit to Discord using that bot. And one day, I don't even remember exactly why, I was like, it'd be really fun to have like kind of a currency system in this bot. And so we started building things like, you could have a balance, you could beg for coins, you could rob each other. And then it just kind of exploded from there to where we were getting thousands of servers weekly, adding our bot. So it was no longer feasible to keep it as a hobby because server costs started growing because I didn't know anything about scaling at the time. And then it's now to the point where it is primarily a text-based global currency game on Discord. You can add the bot to your server, start earning currency, interacting with other players, and your progress is saved anywhere you use the bot on Discord. So and it's something.
It is something. And my understanding is that I know you said it exploded once you added this currency, but it already had a lot of popularity even before that, didn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't too small. I want to say it was like 20,000, 30,000 servers had it just for like memes and just kind of the more funny functionality we had at the time.
Yeah. And how did you get the word out there for that functionality?
So there's these things, it's very niche. I don't know if other like games or any other industry has this, but there was these lists dedicated to listing bots on Discord. So you'd go to a website, you'd be like, I want a fun bot for my server. And it would be like, you could categorize things. So they had these upvote systems, and we would do something like, I don't remember the exact perks. I think you could like get extra or lower cooldowns if you posted, or for posting memes if you upvoted, and then we'd get higher on the list, and people just like memes. So
yeah. I think, one of the things, and we're going to talk a lot about sort of game design and development, but one of the things I've realized is if you want a massively popular anything, comedy routine, bot, you need to target a common enough group of people. And that's why something like Candy Crush is massively popular and something like Dwarf Fortress is just popular. So okay, you had 20 to 30,000 servers using it. And then on a whim, you decided, let's add some currency. And now it's exploded to having, an order of low number of hundreds of thousands of monthly users. So what does your team look like behind this bot at this point?
Sure, great question. We've got kind of a diverse team doing super not traditional roles. We've got currently, as of right now, myself, which I do a lot of product management and game design specifically, not a lot of development anymore. I've got someone who does a majority of the bot development on the front end. So like what the users are actually like the games that they're interacting with. And then I've got someone who works on the back end doing a lot of the infrastructure stuff. And then as far as development, that's about it. And then we've got a couple people who do like, we have a whole moderation team because we have to have rules with a global currency. And then we've got 2 pixel artists and a graphic graphic artists, and that's what our team currently looks like.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things, again, for those who hadn't heard of Discord or haven't thought of games on chat applications, it's very different from a traditional like download Minecraft and you're looking at a game. There's animations, there's music, there's all this other stuff. You have pixel artists, but there's a certain amount of things you're restrained, you can't do, and then certain things that you have to do very differently. Can you talk about how it differs from traditional game development in that sense?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different facets of how it's different. Like on one hand, there's the obvious of you're working within Discord and like what tools they provide you. So we're stuck on using just basic Markdown. We can't do a lot of customization with what things look like. But then you've also got things like anti-cheat for a game like this. We can't, install a program on your computer. So we have to rely on kind of like processing data to like look for trends to just like give a red flag. We can't really do any automated like banning just because we can never be as sure as a game developer can be if you were downloading a game off Steam or something.
What does cheating look like? I don't want you to have to reveal, what do cheaters do exactly, but when you've seen cheaters in the past, what are they doing to manipulate the system? Is it creating lots of accounts?
So, due to the nature of Discord, and I guess this is another reason it's different, people can make Discord accounts for free. It's not against their Discord terms of service to have multiple. So we can't like outlaw having multiple accounts, but what we try to do is we try to stop automation, is a big one. And then the worst, most egregious, where most of our time is spent like fine tuning these like models and stuff, is people have written programs that can simultaneously run hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, sorry, thousands of accounts, to automate things at once. Like there's some like really complex, like I just saw one today that was in Golang, and you can just put in a bunch of tokens you buy from like a marketplace and like just run it. And we're like, okay, well, they're open source, so that helps us fight it a little bit more. But yeah, cheaters, it's mostly about automation.
Yeah. Well, you said tokens you can buy. Is this in-game tokens? Is it API tokens from something?
So the thing that makes fighting this kind of hard is Discord. How it works essentially is each user, each account has a token that they're operating under while they use the client. So they're buying Discord accounts and using those tokens from those accounts to automate it without having to have like different clients on their screen.
I see. And what I'm trying to understand is you said signing up for a Discord account is free. So they need these tokens because I'm assuming Discord has some way of detecting when you do 100,000 account creations, or is there some other reason behind why they need these tokens?
Yeah, Discord does a little work there. They have some captchas, they have systems in place to like kind of quarantine accounts. But basically, I guess the reason it's needed specifically is it's not realistic. Like it's not in a lot of games you'll have like auto clickers, right? Like it'll be a visual program on a screen clicking something. Everything these people are doing with these like complex scripts is fully like they'll put it on a server and like rotate IPs and like do all these things to avoid detection.
I see.
So they need those Discord tokens to be able to automate that without even having a screen.
Yeah. Okay. So the anti-cheat looks very different. Do you have any sort of audio in the game at all?
No. Technically you can work with Discord's API to have a bot and a voice channel doing things. There's popular like music bots and stuff. But we haven't found a really good use case to be like, hey, join a voice channel to play so you can have certain audio. So we've basically gone audioless unless they're visiting our website and doing fun things there sometimes.
Okay. And what are those kinds of fun things on the website?
So we've had a lot of mini games in the past. We're in the middle of rewriting, so those have not made it over to the rewrite. But it's things like people found it really funny, and I personally found it funny. Like there would be like things you could click, and it'll just like have sound effects and stuff, and like just fun mini games. And we're working on something I can't go too in depth in, just because it's not secret, but it's not. I don't like to make promises in case they don't turn out. But we're working on something that it's called a Discord activity. It's basically an activity in a voice chat where you more or less get an iframe to work with, and people can play games within Discord. And we're looking to expand into that, so that'll have audio and it'll be kind of a fishing mini game. So we're trying to explore options because I personally, audio is a huge thing for me in games. So like, it's really weird working day to day outside an environment that can allow that.
Yeah. Have you spent time making what I would call traditional games, something where you download the game or you go to a website?
Not at any meaningful capacity. I keep spending a little bit of time learning, doing a little bit on like a project, and then going back to my regular work and getting sucked in back there. Um, but that is something I want to explore getting more into going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, this idea that you described about essentially having an iframe sounds like, how do we get the traditional gameplay with the constraints of what Discord provides for us? So
Mhm.
it's interesting. And the fishing mini game and everything. Do you feel as though the branding DankMemer is helping now or hurting?
That's a great question. I think it kind of it feels almost misleading. Like it's definitely a name where if you say it in a Discord server with people who have been around for years, it's very possible they know the name. In that case, our branding's been pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't really say much about the game, but we're too far in to change it at this point too.
Yeah.
So we do our whole game is still very like memey. We're very non-serious. Like the bot will not always be kind to you if you like put in a wrong argument or something. We don't take it too seriously, like in a UX perspective. Um, so in that sense, it still kind of matches, but it is definitely not the most obvious thing when you like see it
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah. But that's interesting, because the evolution of a product, at what point do you say, okay, we're switching branding? And I know major companies do this from time to time, but then they have the resources to put more wood behind that arrow. Speaking of having resources, how do you monetize this?
So we've done a lot of different forms of this over the years. So like I said at the start, it was a hobby. So naturally we got to the point where my own bank account was being drained for server costs. So we made a Patreon and we're like, hey, if you guys could just support, there's no perks, but it'll keep the bot going. And then at a certain point, it was taking so much time, and the Patreon was growing. I was like, I should probably do this as like an income. Like this feels like the natural next step. So eventually, what we got into is having like a full-on subscription system with different like perks, like different bonuses in game. Like one of them is, and robbing is still in the currency. Like if someone robs you, you lose less coins when they rob you. Basic stuff like that. And then recently, in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've moved still to have subscriptions, but more of a focus on like a premium currency, kind of like you'd see in a mobile game.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of this needing to be free to play, with it being on Discord, we really have to lean into like mobile monetization. So yeah, premium currency is the current like focus there.
Okay. And do you feel like it's all been well received? Has there ever been something where you made waves and there was chaos and people said, no, I don't like this, or I want to change?
With the monetization.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely been, and I completely get it. Like I would never detract from their opinions on this. There's definitely been a large number of people who feel that things can be too pay to win at times, and I'm like, I do get that. Like I truly do. So we try to find balances where like Warframe. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Was a big inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of microtransactions in the game, but you can do a lot of that for free. It's more pay for convenience than pay to win. It's something we try to bridge as much as we can.
Okay. I think that's a good compromise. I feel like games as an industry, it's just changed so much that it used to be only you bought a box product. There were no subscriptions. And obviously we've changed more and more to subscriptions and microtransactions, and those can be sustaining for what people need. You are able to sustain your team, which you said has several people on it, the moderation team and everything. Are you, and you don't have to answer this if this is too personal, are you happy with the outlook of, let's say, the next year or two of where DankMemer is going?
So as of right now, post COVID, and there's been some Discord changes, which is a whole long conversation. Our user rate is stable. It's no longer steadily growing. It's not declining. It's stable. So a year from now, I do see it being equally successful. Whether or not we're still actively month over month making active features, I don't know for sure. The team itself has had a lot of ideas for things outside of DankMemer, but the current model we have is sustainable.
Okay. I want to come back to this in just a second, the lots of ideas outside of DankMemer, because I want to sort of paint the story of your journey. This started about 7 years ago, and you said you didn't have a lot of experience doing this, not a lot of experience developing, and certainly not the level of success that you had as you grew this out. So what did that look like for you? At what point did you say, I can't do this on my own, or I need more expertise? Were you scrambling? Were you stressed? How did all of that unfold for you?
So a lot of it started getting really stressful when it became a currency game and a business. When those two started intertwining, things got really complex. I brought on a friend who started development at the same time as me. His name is Zane, and he was a lot more programming focused. Like that was a lot more his skill set than mine. So he was pretty integral for being the person that would help with stability, because that was like one of our biggest initial challenges. Because in the beginning, it's not this way anymore, but in the beginning, the bot was a giant monolith, one single service, and it was gateway based on Discord, which it's just not super stable if you don't build it right.
Yeah.
So, kind of when it was him and I again starting to scramble, and I felt like I was constantly behind on content I wanted to make, and he was constantly behind on stability. That's when we brought in a couple more developers who knew about development and knew about Discord, but they weren't like, core, like, they can do any seat like Zane and I were doing at the time. And they helped me expand the user facing content a ton. And then at a certain point, we decided we can't just go off developers. We need artists, because I was doing some of my own art. One of the other developers was doing some art. It was really bad. Like people love it to this day. Like some of the items in the game have skins of the original like art, and people love it. But so at a certain point, I just realized, like, while I can wear a lot of hats, if I want it to keep growing and be successful, I simply can't.
Yeah. Yeah. So is Zane still working? You said you had a front end and an infrastructure. Those are the main devs, and then some non-traditional roles. Is Zane still there?
So this is a very bittersweet change, but actually August was his last month, because he's been in university for a while, and he actually just accepted a job offer at Uber. So I'm very happy for him, and definitely like a really big step up from working on a Discord bot, but also bittersweet because we're gonna miss him.
Wow. Yeah. Well, look, I asked about your journey. This is equally interesting that when a lot of people ask me on the stream, hey, do you need a computer science degree to get started? And it's like, no, obviously you don't. There is so much proof out there in the world. And yet, how many people are like, hey, I worked on a Discord bot for, 7 years, right? Zane started with you pretty much, and then went to work for Uber, and then who knows what will happen after that. And maybe he'll come back. Maybe he'll find some time to work on it. Who knows? But yeah, I can see how that's bittersweet. Congrats to him, by the way. So now, you mentioned how you grew out the team, how you felt. You've learned a lot over that time. And then you said you have lots of ideas outside of DankMemer when I asked about the outlook for the next year or two. Can you share any of those? Or any? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we've got this huge repository of art, and we've got an existing community. And it feels almost a little silly to not leverage that existing community to be like, hey, if you liked this game, we're also working on this new game. Come check it out. So myself and the current, I guess you'd call it front end developer, his name is Badosh, and he has a slight history in Steam game development. He's put out a few small ones, just kind of for fun. So we've talked about using our existing art assets to build, like, we've talked about an idle game. We've talked about an incremental game. Like, we just kind of small things that work with like our pixel art sprites.
Yeah.
And then past just that, like me personally, I'm a huge fan of like horror games and multiplayer games. And so I've been looking a lot into like the 3D space and learning how to develop in like C# with Unity. So we have a lot of plans that aren't super concrete. It's more like we have the assets, well, we don't have the time currently. We have the potential to have time. And we have the drive. We all of us like working together. We like what we do. So just something in the game development world, with kind of a jumping off point with where we have. We have a Discord server with 200 some thousand members. So like it's a great place to start.
I want to just address that very last bit before moving to some other stuff, because I'm curious. Do you know what the biggest Discord server is?
I don't currently, but there used to be a limit. They used to cap it at like 500,000. I want to say they took off the limits for some of their partners. I think it might be Midjourney, maybe has like 1 million members or something crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. This, by the way, just an aside here, it's almost unfathomable that platforms popped up that had almost nothing to do with games. Discord was gaming adjacent. It was chat for gamers. And now it is a game platform somehow. And at one point, they even experimented with being a game store, and then they ditched that idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to get back to the track that I had originally, which is, so you said you don't have time right now, but you have a lot of ideas. You have a lot of resources you can leverage. I think it's good to explore that. When will you get the time? When does that happen? When do you build out this game or prototype it or share it with your audience?
That I feel like is the never-ending question that can't always be answered. I feel like, I've seen your streams for a few years now. Like, I feel like you probably feel the same way in some ways of like, you have these projects that you want to work on, and you're like, but I could be doing this, and these users or these people will be really happy to see this. And then you're also like, but also I need to find a way to carve out some time to do my next thing. And that's kind of where we are of like, our users are happy, but they love the fact that we give regular updates. So we, our goal right now is we're spending a lot of time on development tooling. We're spending a lot of time on like games that people enjoy that are sustainable long term, not just I completed all the content. And then once we've got enough of that where we feel confident where we can kind of devote half of our time to that and still have about the same output is when we'll start switching time to a new project.
Yeah, I was going to say it's either got to be something like that or ditching the game or finding a maintenance team who can work on this and still produce some profit as you're going. I think it is tough. I think there are people out there who seem to be able to manage many different irons in the fire at a time. And it to me seems like a superpower. So that you're even spending time learning how to do 3D stuff, picking up Unity, picking up C# when you don't have a Unity game out there right now is admirable. So good job.
Thanks.
There's another skill that you said that you had to hone quite a lot, which was addressing feedback. You get tons of feedback and it doesn't always mesh with itself because there are different people giving this feedback. How do you sort through it? How do you prioritize it? How do you find the time to even do any of this?
For people out there who are familiar with game design and are making their own games, I feel like this is personally a very hot topic, very up for debate. I think there is this sense of some people think they need to make a game that people want to play, and they need to follow as much feedback as possible. And then some people think that they should be making the game that they want to play, and if people want to play it, they will. You got to find a balance, is my opinion here. I lean a little bit more towards the game that I want to make, but still inviting a lot of that user feedback in for things that don't matter against my large goals. So like a good example is because we're an economy game, global scale, any minor changes can influence everyone globally. Mm-hmm. So like if you think of an incremental game like Cookie Clicker, it doesn't matter if people are getting massive numbers because it's their own personal games. Like nothing bad is going to happen there. So when we have to look at the global numbers and we have to see something is a little bit too strong, everyone's going to focus on this system, all the other things are going to fall by the wayside. We have to bring it back a little bit. And people don't like that, obviously. And they're like, well, my feedback is this, my feedback is that. And we have to figure out what's the best balance for like the actual health of the game, mm-hmm. but also for player fun. And like that's something that I've had to learn the hard way for sure. Because sometimes to me, looking at data, it's like, well, this is the obvious answer. But then people playing it, they're like, that might be the obvious answer, but I'm not having any fun anymore.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I find very interesting. If I always kind of say, if you're making a business product, you're making, let's say, Microsoft Excel. It's like, okay, you can figure out how people get their needs met. You can maybe figure out how easy it is, but fun doesn't really factor into it. And fun is so hard to measure, and it's different for everybody. So do you have any examples of a time when you made something where the data didn't show that it was the best decision, but players loved it?
That's a good question. Let me think. Did make the best. Okay. So we do have a fishing minigame already in text form. Like it's not text, it's got images technically. And we intended to release it in a way because the whole game, for the most part, up until this point, was like, how do I make my numbers go higher? I want more money. I want to, etc. But we wanted a passion project of this fishing minigame, and we didn't really want it to be focused around money at all in the currency. We wanted it to be focused around progression and completion and collection. And we built this, and we even told users up front, like, we are building this. It's going to be really exciting, but it's not going to be about making profit, you probably just won't make a profit.
Yeah.
And when we released it, it made a lot of profit. It was broken. Like it was like badly broken. And so my immediate reaction is what I wanted to do is basically take that back to like 1% of what it was doing. Because I'm like, we told you up front, like this shouldn't be a surprise that we don't want this. But a lesson we've learned in the past is you can't just nerf something immediately massively because it's too big of a shock.
Yeah.
You have to slowly rein things in. So as we slowly reined it in, we had this whole plan to keep doing so over like a period of 2 or 3 months. And we hit this certain threshold of like how much money fish were selling for, where people were like, I don't really feel like this is really worth my time anymore. And we saw numbers drastically start to dip. And so we had to kind of stop there. But now these days, it's making money. It's doing the thing we didn't want it to do. On paper, it didn't really make sense. It still doesn't make the most sense, but people are genuinely enjoying it. And as a business sense now, it's a driver of income because it's got a lot of cosmetics and such. So it worked out in the end. And that's one of the things that's really hard is sometimes you have to fail to figure out what works, because I don't think our initial vision would have been fun at this point.
Yeah, that is always a challenge though, right? And I feel like this holds true for so many industries that you'll probably learn more failing than you will being successful at something, because at least then you learn what doesn't work and you can start trying to figure out where to go from there. Some of the examples I've heard from other people who've been working on games are things like, hey, we actually had to make the win rates between two players more disparate because people wanted to either really win or really lose, but not like kind of just eke out a win or something. So yeah, this fishing game, I think, is a good example of that. It made me wonder, from a game design perspective, why do people collect these items? I understand there's an economy, but doesn't that mean there needs to be a function for these items? Like, what do fish do in the game?
So there's outside of fish, I'll leave fish out because for the most part they are just to sell for profit at this point and collection. But items has been a core of the economy. Like there's items you can buy, collect, trade, etc. At first, all the items when we started the currency stuff, they all had functions. The functions were really quirky, kind of funny. But then people were like, I want a new item. I want a new item. And within the scope of our game, we're like, we can only have so many items have usages before it's like, we just can't have any more items. So we introduced a collectible item type, which is basically this item does nothing, but you can collect it. It's worth nothing. You can't sell it. You can't use it. It's just a collectible. In some ways, the collectibles are still for progression because, for instance, there's a system where you need to turn in a certain amount of a certain item to get a reward. So some of those certain items can be collectibles. But we found that what people back then and even now really enjoy, like a whole subset of people, is completion and achievements. So we've made sure to put a lot of effort, especially in the fishing system, into like seeing how many fish you've discovered for the first time. So it's like, it's not just a number of here's how many you discovered, it's here's how many you discovered out of here's how many is possible. And like visualizing that and making it a big focus. And that has really driven people to enjoy collecting, even if it's also for profit. Like our last update, Pokemon has a Pokédex, and you kind of fill it out. We did something similar with the fish because we're like, we've got over 100 variants of fish at this point. So like, it'd be fun to just have a page where you can see question marks or the fish you had. People love it. Like it's getting a ton of traffic from the fishing players. So
yeah, this is, I touched on this earlier, that you've got to target a large enough swath of people. Within those then are these different demographics of people. I think they're officially like psychographics of people who like a certain kind of gameplay. It's like if you release an RPG, some people love exploration and hate trading. Some people love item collection. Is there a segment of players that you either like prioritizing or don't like prioritizing based on what they enjoy? Because you said you like making this game partially for what you enjoy, right?
Yeah. One thing we did with this game is we made it an insanely wide scope. There's a lot of different gameplay past making numbers go bigger, or different ways to make numbers go bigger that are completely separate from each other. So one thing we have, so like we talked about robbing, for example, people can rob each other. some people love robbing each other, and it holds a place in my heart because it was one of the first things I built, like in this whole system. Other people, understandably, hate getting robbed because they're like, I grinded for all this money and now I just lost it. So it, as much as I understand it, it pains me to make all these things of like, here's how you can avoid being robbed. Here's like, we had to make a passive mode and we have to constantly decide, this new system to interact with each other. If you're in passive mode, can you interact with each other or not? Because we have to have upsides and downsides. I just wish robbing was on all the time, but I understand it wouldn't be as fun.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the kinds of things. I feel like you also have power users who are very vocal, even though maybe they're a minority. And something that blows me away, I've played a lot of Blizzard games, and I feel like for whatever reason, that's got to have some of the most negative fans out of any company. And I don't understand it, but it's like any news article I read, my reaction is, oh, hey, that sounds cool. And then I read comments saying like, this is the worst. This is ruining the game. Why don't they fire these people? So anyway, I think you have to accommodate players, even if they don't like what you're doing, or even if you don't agree with the play style.
Yeah. And that's actually a great example too, because one system we have is fighting, where you basically put up a wager of your own, and there's a fight command that's partially RNG, but there's different moves that do different amount of damages or upsides or downsides. A fighting community is what you just described with the Blizzard community. Any change, it's all you see is anger. But then a few months later, they're all still playing and they're happy, and then they're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. But initially, they're all like, this is the worst thing ever. I'm so upset.
Yeah,
and that's the fighting community for us.
Yeah, and I don't want to go totally out on a limb here and talk about this, but I think that people don't recognize how much work and care and love goes into these games. And they just think, this isn't what I want. Why are they not catering to what I want? So yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry you have to deal with that, but it sounds like they play. So
that's very true, because a lot of times you'll see in the feedback, because we do we try to do a survey like every 3 months. And a lot of the feedback, people will say, you made this change for no reason, or you made this change and I don't know, and I had one person the other day, I was reading feedback, and they said, and I don't care why, change it back.
Wow.
But yeah, people, they don't, and again, it's understandable, but people think like, here's how I play. Why would you change this? Like, what was so bad about it?
Well, that's the other side of this coin too, I think, which is if people can't see the reason, then they just start coming up with their own, and then they shoot those down as why that's a bad reason, when that may never have had anything to do with why you made that choice in the first place. And that's also why I think communication from developers is important. It sounds like you do these surveys. Do you ever need to do things like a Q&A where people can ask you questions? Does that help quell any of this sentiment? Do you think it's making an impact?
So we actually do monthly blog posts. It's basically like what's going on in development, address any important issues that have popped up in the last month. And that's helped a little bit, but it's only really read by our power users. So we've tried things like Q&As. They went okay, but we tried to do them once a month, but it was like the same questions every time, and we're like, this just doesn't really feel like we're doing a lot of productive stuff here.
Yeah.
So like one thing we've done is in our Discord server, there's a sneak peek channel. So I'll be like, hey, we're working on this upcoming feature, and then I'll specifically list out like some super exciting things to get people hooked, and it's a short paragraph so people don't lose attention span. And then underneath of it, it'll be like, and here's why this change is happening. Like, to try to like get it right in front of their faces for any important changes coming up.
Yeah, and as a consumer of games, I find that helpful too, to at least know what the developers are thinking, because at least then I know, okay, here's what they determined, and not try to come up with my own reasons, because sometimes it's impossible. You just don't have that insight as a player. Talking about game design, you read a book, I'm going to read the title of it, Level Up, The Guide to Great Video Game Design by Scott Rogers. And you, I think, loved this book. Is that accurate to say?
I got through half of it. I haven't finished it yet. I have it on my nightstand, and I try to read it whenever I'm not exhausted at night. But yeah, it's a really good book.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, because I have not read this book, what are your biggest takeaways from it?
Okay, that's a good question. So this book specifically, and I haven't read a lot of books about game design specifically, so I don't know if this is the norm or not. But this book specifically takes a lot of time to explain game design concepts historically and what the game designers were thinking at the time. So one of my biggest takeaways is really this sounds super philosophical, but I don't mean it this way. Like, people don't understand each other, and sometimes you need to use that to your advantage, but like it's gonna just be a thing you struggle with when designing games.
Yeah.
Like, um, every game designer, good, bad, in between, is gonna struggle with understanding why someone else wants to do something, or someone else is gonna struggle to understand why they're doing it. And this book is pretty good about showing like a lot of perspectives from the actual designers of these games historically. And like they're games that I've played, and I'm like, okay, actually that makes a lot of sense. Like you don't think about it, but like it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I like that. I like that it's almost like a case study. Hey, here's a game that exists you might have played. And I've seen this done in a way I really like. Sometimes they'll break down a game mechanic like, hey, our pro players find that this is overpowered and our new players find that it's not strong enough. And it's like, well, the item is just different in the hands of different people. How do we balance that out? And they talk about what they did and how they did it. And I like reading about that stuff. How do you apply that to what you're doing? You know, people don't understand each other. How do you, what do you do to overcome that?
So part of it is those posts I was talking about. And then a lot of it is these, you'll see a lot of surveys and it'll be like, did you have fun after that match? Or did you, like, what do you like? We try to do these big surveys and we try to incentivize people to actually do them. And it's really in-depth, like questions that you wouldn't expect, or at least I wouldn't expect to see other game developers asking. And it's things like, you know, did you enjoy this? And if they selected yes or no, it'd go to a different flow and it'd be like, what specific part of this didn't you enjoy? Like, and then I try to convince them to give as much detail as possible. And when I'm looking through that feedback, what I'm looking for is things that are not the norm specifically, because like you can see trends and like that's easy to see and quantify. But I look for like these edge cases of users who like we learned at one point we learned there was a certain feature that was just like it was complicated, but I couldn't see why, the developers couldn't see why, and our power users couldn't see why.
Yeah.
But through looking at these edge cases, we found kind of a compromise that everyone enjoyed in the end. It was better even than just like making a massive change. And I don't think I would have found that through like a regular, what do you like about this bot survey?
Yeah. You'd have to count on people recounting what they might have thought at, minute number 3 of playing a game. Yeah. Well, so on the topic of game design, and you have the successful game, what do you think, if you look at the industry at large, talking about indie developers, what do you think are maybe the most common mistakes you see indie devs making?
Okay. So I don't want to put myself as an expert just because Discord development is different. But I do see a lot of Discord bots trying to do game bots that do make a lot of these mistakes. And a lot of it is a lot of people think like programmers while they're designing the games. And I've learned, and it helps me that I tried to learn programming and it's not like my best skill. I've learned that programmers often think very logically. They think through steps like, well, obviously this is in front of your face, so you're going to want to click it. But you have to learn to design games in a way that isn't logical. Like you have to think. It helped us to have a team of basically have people who played the game in advance or played an update in advance, and we would just ask them their thoughts on a few things. Mm-hmm. But it's helpful to find people that don't know the intricacies, that aren't reading everything. And specifically when we find these testers, we're not looking for power users for most of the positions, because so I think that's a big mistake, people looking at it too programmatically, because sometimes I feel like sometimes looking at it that way just makes it a lot less fun in general.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen this happen, probably even with people you know in real life, where they're looking at an error message on a computer saying, why won't this work? And literally the answer to their question is in that error dialogue. And they just, it's like a blindness. There's no processing of that information. And as a game developer, like you said, it's easy as a programmer to say, okay, well, here's what I'm doing. There's a message right there on the screen. They're going to read this, but people don't sometimes. And I feel like one of the learnings I've had is that if everyone is encountering a problem, then there's a problem with that thing. It's not that you can blame your users for all that stuff. So anyway, working around that I think is really challenging. I want to make sure we can devote enough time to this next topic, because you said you wanted to talk about ADHD. And I feel like it's probably informed a lot of your journey over the last 7 years. You said you were diagnosed last year and it changed how you thought about your career. Just open-ended, how did it change that? How did it change how you think about your career?
So my diagnosis specifically changed my career because I still have imposter syndrome. I think everyone in our industry has imposter syndrome at one point or another. But it helped me realize that like me not being able to focus on a task or me jumping between tasks doesn't necessarily mean what I was working on is bad or boring and everyone's going to hate it. It doesn't necessarily mean um, it doesn't define anything. That's kind of the point of before, when I really just thought like I'm making this thing, I'm not having fun with it, this must just be bad and I'm going to fail at doing this. It helped me realize that like my brain literally works a little differently, and just because I'm spending 3 weeks working on one thing does not mean someone who's playing with it for half an hour isn't going to have fun. So it a lot of it was like resetting the way I think specifically about my own work, and what I'm doing with it. And I feel like since I've gotten that diagnosis, my game development has primarily changed in the sense of I'm able to do things uh, correctly instead of rushing them out because I'm worried, like, well, this is going to fail anyway. I want to get on to the next thing.
That's very interesting. So I have a layperson's understanding of ADHD, supplemented by some psychologist friends and some recent research in preparation for this interview. And that is not at all what I thought you were going to say when I asked about this. You essentially, if I'm to sum up, you would work on something, and because of the amount of time or your current feeling while working on it, would think that it's going to be received differently. Yeah. Did you find the usual, I guess, focus, hyperfixation, bouncing between tasks, losing your contact? Did you find those sorts of issues that typically go hand in hand with ADHD?
So I do definitely have those issues. And the thing that kind of clicked with me getting my diagnosis is, oh, that's what that is. Like, instead of thinking, like negatively about myself.
I see.
So I definitely do. And like some of my best and worst projects have been things that I hyper focused on that came literally out of the blue. I'm like, let's put aside this project and go full in on this new one that I just wrote documentation for today. Like, so yeah, I definitely do get a lot of the stereotypical symptoms as well.
Yeah. Well, I have, this is a burning question in my mind, which is what led to you getting that diagnosis?
Man, I wasn't okay. That's a good question.
Well, again, you don't have to answer this, but
oh, no, it's not like it's too personal or anything. I think. Let me start by saying, I think my mom has ADHD, but she said, and I don't know how old she is, and she probably wouldn't like me telling anyway. She said, at my age, why would I get diagnosed? Because I've learned to live with it.
Yeah.
And while I think that is absolutely valid because everyone's different, everyone works differently, for me, I'm like, well, I've learned to live with it. There's things that I feel like I'm glad I got the diagnosis because there's things I can think about differently about myself. But specifically what led me to it is I was just in a huge period of like burnout, and the burnout was starting to lead to like a lot of depression, and it was affecting my work, my personal life. And I basically was looking for a therapist, and I found one that was neurodivergent friendly. And I was just kind of describing a lot of the problems I was having. And they're like, would you like to take this test that tests for X, Y, and Z? And I was like, yeah, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, I've always kind of wondered because like, I didn't think I had ADHD, actually. I was thinking other things, but because I was never like the type of person to be, you see stereotypically, which we now know is incorrect, of to have ADHD, you have to be bouncing off walls. Yeah. Like, you have to be super hyperactive. But what I learned is hyperactivity can show itself in lots of ways. Like I'll watch a video and then I'll like repeat the viral sound over and over for like 3 days straight. That's hyperactivity. Like, so yeah, it was really just a lot of burnout and negative feelings that led me to getting therapy. And then it was kind of one after another. So
yeah. And you kind of described it, my words here, but like a light turning on saying, oh, that's what that was. And I wonder, this is an out there hypothetical question. Let's say you could go back in time to when you're half the age you are now. What's maybe the biggest thing that you've learned that could have addressed some of those signs that you weren't even aware were signs at the time?
I think the biggest thing that I could have benefited from, so just to be clear, you're essentially asking if I could have gone back and known way earlier that I had this,
Yeah.
what would I have? Okay.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing would be I would have stuck to things more because I would have been able to earlier in life learn skills to be able to stick to projects and commitments. Because it's not as easy as like, make a to-do list and follow it.
Yeah.
Like I would probably have a college degree right now if I had known earlier in life because I would have been able to get accommodations for myself. So yeah, sticking to things would be the big thing.
Well, and on that topic, you mentioned your journey getting to 2017 when you started game dev included web design, videography, being a chef. Was that a result of the ADHD essentially?
I think it was a little bit of that, a little bit of what am I gonna do with my life? Like, I was still pretty young and I had just dropped out of college and I was I technically switched my degree to I think it was called information sciences or something. And we were doing some programming. I'm like, this is really fun. My professor told me, hey, this is not the best use of your money to go to this university for this degree. And I appreciate him being really honest. It seems a little backwards for him to convince the students to drop out. But so then I dropped out, and that's when I started web design. And I was like, this is really fun. The people who I've worked with are enjoying the websites I made. Looking at them now, oh my god, they were so terrible. I don't know how they enjoyed them. But then I stopped getting jobs with that, so I moved back to my hometown. I got my high school job back, but this time I was a manager there, and so I was working in the kitchen, making a lot of food, experimenting with stuff like that. And it was looking back at it now, like I don't know if ADHD necessarily caused a lot of the jumping I did, but it definitely made it easier to consume for me. Like I didn't feel bad jumping from job to job because it was keeping me engaged and interested.
I see. Well, so there's a question I want to ask about this. Let me think about this for a second. You've jumped between all these things. You settle on where you are now. Oh yeah. You mentioned a while ago. That's what I was trying to remember. You said you've had a very sort of non-traditional career path, and you certainly have. I mean, dropping out, going to where you are now, having what you're doing. Do you feel like you're locked into that non-traditional career path? This is based on something you said a long time ago, so it's hard for me to formulate that question.
You're fine.
Yeah.
That's something I'm currently kind of wrestling with. Because I've redone my resume. I try to keep it up to date every year, not just if I'm looking. And I've got my resume to a place where I like it, but it's very niche. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's hard for someone to go into game design as a field in the first place. And a lot of jobs for game design, they require a lot of experience. I have experience, but it's so incredibly niche. Like I've built skills that I'm confident with, especially in the sense of like building a product that people love to play but can also be monetized. But I do feel locked in the sense of it's really hard to sell my non-traditional experience to a more traditional company.
Yeah. And then you never know, am I going to get sort of under-leveled if I go to a traditional company? Is this going to be a good fit for me? Am I going to feel like I'm too confined when I'm there?
Absolutely.
So I see what you're saying now. Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry it took a long time to get to that point. On another topic, you've started a podcast, ironically called Hyperfocused, where you talk about, I believe, ADHD and its impact, and you're up to 4 episodes. What are your favorite topics you've explored with? You're doing it with a friend, right? Yeah. What are your favorite topics you've explored with that friend?
So I'm going to start by saying, in case anyone did decide to go look that up, in classic ADHD fashion, we're really bad about posting regularly. So it kind of fits in. Maybe it's on purpose. I don't know. But I think our favorite topic is we like to talk about specifically people's external perceptions of ADHD. And we make it very clear we're not experts. This is our own personal history and like what we've realized over the years. But there's so many things that go into ADHD that people who are neurotypical or have a different neurodivergency just might not realize. And there's a lot of like negativity and stigma around ADHD. So we do really enjoy talking about that because we don't have a lot of people who have listened to it, but a lot of people who have listened to it are instantly like, wow, this makes me feel so much better that other people are having this experience, and that makes us feel good to hear as well. So
Yeah, I see that normalization happening across society very slowly. I think this is one of those cultural shifts that it takes multiple generations before people destigmatize things. And it's super unfortunate because if you happen to live in a time or a culture where it's stigmatized, then just too bad for you, right? Like
yeah.
there's really, yeah. So now we have some more awareness about it. And I was, like I said, I read recently, and I did some research on this, and I guess the genetic transference rate of ADHD is something like 70 to 80%. The people who get it mostly got it genetically. And then, yeah. So I feel like it's probably here to stay, and it's probably being affected by our usage of computers and phones. And yeah, more awareness and more acceptance and more sort of like you said, overcoming any issues or thoughts you might have had. And you've developed some mechanism now. And yeah, who knows? Maybe, your mom would have gotten a diagnosis, whatever, 30 years ago, and who knows how it could have changed her life. So
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot hard left over here because we have about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about the cybersecurity nonprofit you're working at. Can you do the same thing you did with DankMemer and do a little intro of what the company is and sort of what your role is there?
Sure. So it's the same friend that I do that podcast with. His name is Aaron, and he's got, I think he just got his master's in cybersecurity, and him and his friend, who's also in cybersecurity, built this nonprofit, and they recently invited me on within the last year, and their goal is to help cybersecurity be more accessible to learn. Because while there is like, you can, it's the internet age. You can search up how to learn these things. You can even learn them without degrees. They found a lot of resources lacking in the ability to be read by a layman.
Mm-hmm.
And so their goal is basically to build a community and potentially some products to help people empower their cybersecurity careers, whether they're beginners, which is where they brought me in a little bit because I don't know anything about cybersecurity, or people on more their end of the spectrum who are been doing this for years professionally.
So it sounds like a worthy goal. Is the team the three of you?
No, it's a super non-traditional structure. It is a nonprofit. We have board meetings. I'm on the board. Um, it's kind of a even with it being a nonprofit, it's kind of a side project for everyone on the team,
Hmm.
and they kind of bring people in and out as needed for like, hey, you've got this kind of skill. Would you mind helping us? So a lot of people who are volunteering volunteer their time specifically. Um, so like for myself, I came on initially to be a board member and help out with giving some like user experience advice for a product that they're working on called Cyber Courses, which is going to be a website to like basically find and track resources specifically. So that's kind of what I've done there so far. And yeah.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things where you don't need deep cybersecurity experience to be able to help with UX on cyber courses. Is the primary way that they plan on helping to aggregate existing resources? You mentioned community and product. Are they? Yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. How are they planning on helping people learn cybersecurity?
So it's my understanding that the current plan is definitely a bit of uh, utilizing existing resources because there's a lot of great resources out there and aggregating them in a way that is easy to, I guess, again, find. But
Yeah.
then also on top of that, kind of writing their own pieces of like, here's a post about like why these sources are good and like why, like what level they might be helping you at. So it's going to be a little
I
bit
see.
of both of their own content as well as aggregating.
Okay. And yeah, the last big thing I want to ask about is what's been the impact so far, both on you and your experience? Have you been, feeling positive about this? And also on the people who endeavor to learn cybersecurity. Has it helped people already?
So I'm not super into the day to day. I am in the Discord server, and in the Discord server, I do see a lot of people asking questions, getting help with their questions. A lot of people who are like students who are kind of talking about it. And in that sense, from what I know, yes, there's definitely some help ongoing. We are still fledgling, not a lot of funding. So we think uh, our big points that will really be helping people are going to be things like cyber courses that we develop and get out once they're released.
I see. Okay. Yeah, and do you like the experience? If another friend came to you, Aaron too, and said, "Hey, I have another nonprofit. I'd like you to join." Would you say, "Yeah, I think I'll do that"?
I think nonprofits are great. This one, definitely part of the reason for me being on it is because my friend approached me.
Yeah,
But I kind of like giving people like at least my perspective on like products. Like this one specifically, it helped a lot because like we talked about in game design, it's kind of similar. They, in some ways, they were looking at it very programmatically from
yeah,
both the programmer side, and they had a lot of cybersecurity experience. So like one of the early things is I was like, hey, this specific view is still going to be confusing for someone who knows nothing. And I know because I know nothing.
yeah. Well, and it's funny too
So it's
because
nice that way.
their very goal is to help the sort of layperson to make these resources more consumable, and yet, hey, they almost would have fallen into the same traps that all the resources out there fall into. So it's good that you can provide that perspective.
And I do want to point out because I initially thought it was only for like beginners. They do want to help anyone at any
I
level.
see.
So
Yeah.
I would be remiss to not mention that. But
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about some game dev, game design, ADHD, the cybersecurity startup, or the nonprofit. I want to ask you a question sort of out of left field, which is you were a full-time streamer at one point. Do you ever miss streaming? And if so, what do you miss about it? Or are you just happy to be done with it?
I actually miss streaming incredibly. Like if people ask that question of like, if you had all the money you needed and you could just do one career for fun, I think I'd do streaming. Like, um, I'm a very in person, socially awkward person. I'm not great at small talk or making a lot of friends. But on the internet, I feel like I just kind of open up. And I miss having a regular group of people, like a small community to be talking to and sharing experiences with. So I definitely do miss it. It was a lot of fun. And I really liked the technical aspect, like the producing behind the scenes too. So
Yeah. It's funny how that happens, right? Like you didn't have an alter ego on stream. Some people do. They have a character that they play, and yet it still sort of unlocked some part of you that's just different from real life. It's funny how that happens. Uh, I don't have anything else I want to ask only because we're close enough to time. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Do you want to plug anything? Do you have any links you want to talk about? Should people go download, or I guess make a Discord account, download Discord and try out DankMemer?
that's a very funny new. It's funny. Okay, since we have just a minute, it, getting people to try our game is such like we don't do any advertising for that reason because it's not download the game. It's make a Discord account, make a Discord server, invite the game. Like, that's a very funny challenge that we deal with that a lot
Yeah.
of game developers don't. Um, if people want to download DankMemer, it's free to play. With, as we talked about earlier, monetization that you might want to take part in for cosmetics and such. It's a fun time with your friends. So obviously I am biased, but I recommend it. And then if you're looking to get into cybersecurity, keep your eye on CyberInfo. We're hoping to be coming up and an up and coming player in that kind of field. So
Yeah, cool. Well, look, I really appreciate this, Melmsie. I'm glad you could take the time. I had fun talking to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing sort of the next step for DankMemer with all of this, the evolution that you were talking about. So yeah, thanks for being on the show. I hope you have a good rest of your Friday.
yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, take care, Melmsie. Bye.
Bye.